Well, for more on the state of Uber, I'm joined live from Los Angeles by Danilo Kawasaki, Vice President and Chief Operations Officer at Gerber Kawasaki Wealth Management. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So as we know, it's been a month since the company's highly anticipated IPO, but is Uber living up to the hype for investors?
You know, I think investors who invested at the IPO were a little disappointed that the stock hasn't gone up. Basically, they had a 7% down day the day they IPO'd and kind of went all the way down to $36 a share. And then last week or 2 weeks ago climbed above the IPO price for the first time, and it's kind of hovering around $42, $43 a share. You know, Uber was a hyped up IPO and it didn't really live up to the expectations.
So was the small arrival Lyft IPO that happened shortly before Uber any indication of how investors feel overall about car-sharing companies?
You know, in all fairness, Uber did go IPO in a bad day for the market. May was a bad month for the stock market, and in the midst of all the tariffs and all the tension between especially China and the U.S., we had Beyond Meat who IPO'd maybe a week later or a few weeks later, and that did phenomenal. And it's kind of a contrast to how the Uber IPO went. Lyft kind of had a little better IPO. Its stock went up, but then again it went down. We kind of have a philosophy here at our firm that we typically don't buy IPOs. We like to see at least 6 months of financials before we can make an informed decision about the company and how well the company is being run.
And speaking of financials, Uber is another example of a huge and popular tech service used around the world that's not actually profitable. In what ways is the company missing the mark?
It's really difficult to, I went to business school 20 years ago, and basically I learned how to run profitable businesses. And the business model today is you get users and you figure out how to make money later. And that's kind of, Uber's quest is this path to profitability and how long we will take. Right now they're focused on expanding, they're focused on growing. Dara said very clearly that their main goal is to expand globally, and they still don't have a clear path to profitability. Autonomous driving, I think it's going to be huge for them, because obviously one of the biggest costs they have is their drivers.
And obviously, autonomous vehicles not probably welcome news for a lot of these drivers who are already in this ongoing dispute over labor classifications as to whether they're considered freelancers or employees. How is that issue being handled?
Yes, I mean, that's a big issue for Uber. They have 2 million drivers. If all of a sudden they have to pay these drivers as employees and pay benefits and overtime, their business is basically done. Uber lost a few cases in California, Massachusetts. They lost a few cases in France and the UK. This is definitely something that they're paying close attention to. The definition of the employee versus independent contractor does vary from state to state. So it's kind of very difficult to say what will happen, but it's definitely this regulatory issue is definitely a big problem for Uber.
Now let's also look ahead. We know that Uber CEO is expecting autonomous vehicles on the roads in the next 5 years. There's the Uber Copter, some other interesting things that they're working on. Is there a concern that Uber is looking so far ahead that a lot of the present concerns about things like regulations aren't really being adequately factored in?
Well, if you remember how they came about, they basically came in to disrupt an industry, the taxi industry. They used to be called Uber Taxis, and then they changed their name to Uber Technologies. But, that's kind of how this new business school of thought basically works. You have an idea, a disruptive idea, you implement it. It's kind of like shoot and ask questions later, and then you figure out what regulations will need to be in place. The same thing goes for the scooters, right? The electric bikes and scooters that we see everywhere, especially here in LA. They never asked permission to have scooters on the road, and then kind of cities have to come together and figure out the best way to regulate these businesses. So, you know, I don't think that they're too worried. They've gotten to a size where I think what they do matters, and I'm pretty sure they're working with regulators to try to fix the issues that they have.
All right, thank you. Always good to see you. Danilo Kawasaki there, VP and COO of Gerber Kawasaki Wealth Management and registered principal at LPL Financial.